Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending our webinar on working effectively with the Catholic Press with our guest Patrick O'Brien. I'll be introducing him in a minute, but a few things first. I'd like to say that we chose this topic because we know that everyone at one time or another has struggled with getting, attracting notice to what the sisters are doing from our brethren in the Catholic press. And we thought that when Patrick spoke at the conference last fall, he had some excellent ideas and perspectives on dealing with the abuse crisis in the church and the important role of the Catholic Church press in that and how we can work together. So we invited him to join us today, and we're very grateful. I'd like to ask Brian to talk for a moment about the format today and how your role in it, and then we'll get on with the program.
Thanks a lot, Jennifer, and echoing Jennifer's thanks to everybody who joined us and to Patrick for coming on board to make the presentation. The format for the webinar is similar to webinars past with CWR Academy and fairly straightforward. The main portion of the webinar will consist of a presentation from Patrick, and when he completes the presentation, at that point we will open up the webinar to questions. If you happen to have questions as we go, you can submit them via the chat function even before we get to that Q&A period. So I will be monitoring that, and we'll be able to bring those to Patrick if they are submitted prior to the start of that Q&A stretch. As well, you can use the raise hand function here in Zoom once we do get to the Q&A portion of things, and I will be able to unmute folks at that point so you can ask a question if you use that function. Outside of that, all attendees outside of us as panelists will be muted throughout, but again, if you use that raise hand function or the chat function, I will be keeping an eye on both of those, and we'll be able to take any questions or comments you have using those avenues. There will be, after the end of the webinar, shortly thereafter, a brief survey sent to everyone in attendance. So we do ask if you have the opportunity to fill out that survey. That would be great. It's a big help to the folks on the Education Committee when it comes to planning out often future webinars and educational offerings. So if you do have the time to do that and submit that to us, that would be also very helpful. And of course, all CWR Academy webinars, this one included, are archived once they've been completed, once they've gone live. They are recorded and archived on the CWR member website in the member resources area. So anyone who hasn't been able to join us here today will, of course, still have access to the webinar after the fact as well. So that's sort of the outline of what we have going on today, and I'll hand it back to Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Brian. So I'd like to introduce our guest, Patrick O'Brien, President and CEO of Faith Catholic. It's the largest publisher of Catholic periodicals in the United States. It's also a leading Catholic marketing and communication services company. Patrick was part of the team that created Faith Magazine for the Diocese of Lansing, and that was back in 1999. Subsequently, Faith Catholic has become the publisher of numerous other diocesan publications. Prior to his current role, Patrick was formerly a seminarian and also worked in advertising for a variety of industries. Patrick, please, we are all ears for your presentation.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, Brian. Thanks to the participants today. It was a pleasure to be with you at your conference, and I'm delighted to be with you today. I'm going to share my screen, and there we go. And hopefully you will be able to see the presentation here. There. Is that working? Okay, wonderful. There we go. Get back to slide one. So today what we're going to talk about is working effectively with the Catholic press. As Jennifer mentioned, it's difficult sometimes to get our content into coverage in the Catholic press, and so I'm going to explain really several things, kind of understanding the internal workings of the Catholic press. We've got it sort of stated as the internal conflicts affecting the Catholic press, and I'm going to get into what that means because there's really kind of period right now where the Catholic press is looking at its very mission, and there's disagreements about what that mission is, and we're going to explore that and how that may affect you. Secondly, how you might want to build ongoing relationships with these different Catholic news outlets in light of what those realities are. And then we're going to summarize what we covered with some do's and don'ts. And then I look forward to having a discussion with you. I know many of the members of the CWR were members of the Catholic press, are members of the Catholic press, and members of the diocesan press previously. So some of those things that I don't cover, I welcome the discussion later on at the end. So let's start with sort of understanding the internal conflicts within the Catholic press, and it's really about the mission, I think. And before we get into that, let's just sort of look at what the breakdown is of the Catholic press. There's really two broad categories. One is the diocesan press, and 2/3 of the publications in the Catholic press are diocesan magazines, newspapers, and included in that is all of their digital presence. There are only 4 dioceses in the United States that don't publish a print periodical. About 40 dioceses publish magazines, the rest publish newspapers. Then the other third of the Catholic press is what you do. You all have newsletters, many of you do. There's the national Catholic media from the national newspapers and the national magazines. Journals, all that kind of stuff makes up about 1/3. We're not going to really talk a lot about the different forms of media within Catholic media. We're going to refer to it. We're going to kind of mostly focus on kind of what the organizational question is, and a lot of it centers around diocesan media. For many of you, you have a presence in, if there are 197 dioceses in the United States. And if only 4 of them are not publishing, they're using some other form of diocesan media. And so this really is encompassing diocesan media overall, what some of these principles are. And the mission is really a question of, what is the purpose of why a diocese in particular is publishing? And this is true too for the national and religious order press as well. But the Catholic press has a great history. Over 100 years ago, the Catholic Press Association started. And why was it started? It was made up of Catholic publishers who were really trying to build an organization around Catholic publishing and those best practices and supporting one another. And it already was reflective of a publishing tradition in the United States that was already very healthy. And why did that publishing tradition begin in the first place? Well, Catholics weren't always welcome in the public square, right? So the Irish came, the Italians came, the Germans came, they built parishes right next door to one another. And we started creating institutions in society that were Catholic. We had many religious sisters did this, right? They started Catholic hospitals, we had our separate Catholic schools, and we had our separate Catholic newspapers. And the purpose back then wasn't so much to advance the organization as much as it was news and information from a Catholic perspective. The secular media wasn't giving us a fair shake. And so we were creating all these different institutions from schools to hospitals and newspapers. And that's why many bishops 100 years ago or more started their diocesan media, started to print and publish. Same thing with religious orders, why they started to publish. But as time went on, the question became, what are the needs that different religious organizations have now? And again, on the diocesan media side, and this starts to speak to why Faith Catholic grew as a company from one magazine 20 years ago to now America's largest publisher, because we started playing a role in what that question is of the very mission of the Catholic press. And it kind of boils down to, if according to Kara, only 21% of Catholics go to church each week, that means nearly 80% of Catholics aren't in church. And are those 80% of Catholics going to care about news and information from a Catholic perspective if they don't even care about being Catholic? So that meant the question of why do we publish comes up. And the idea that a publication from a diocese maybe shouldn't be focused primarily on news and information, but it should instead be focused on evangelization, faith formation, tying people back to why they're a member of the Catholic faith to begin with. And so that is how we got our start with faith. And many bishops have decided, whether they work with Faith Catholic or not, that the very purpose of diocesan media needs to be primarily for the purposes of building up the church for evangelization. So the question for you as you're working with your own diocesan media, and you look at the sisters who you work for and the congregation's presence in different dioceses, it's not an endless number. You've got schools or some form of ministry or the mother house in a certain number of dioceses. And in those dioceses, they most likely are publishing. And what might be the makeup of that publication? And so we're going to break this down a little bit on how this manifests itself, this question of mission. So the first thing is that if you go to a Catholic press conference, Catholic media conference, and you hear members of the Catholic press over the past few decades, one of the things that you will hear is the idea that we are independent Catholic journalists. Even if our publication is funded by the diocese or funded by the religious order or congregation or funded by some sort of sponsoring institution, there's this idea that there is, even within that, or even though the bishop may be the publisher, we are, as the editor, are independent Catholic journalists. And that serves the church well, because the church needs to have a watchdog. There needs to be fact checking. There needs to be all of the benefits of journalism applied in a diocesan setting. But that also begs the question, how can you be truly an independent journalist? We're not the New York Times working inside a diocese, really. And so isn't this really just an organizational publication? And shouldn't the publication really be so closely tied to the organization that it is advancing the organization, that it is the best asset that the organization has? So a Catholic independent journalist would say, yes, but I don't want to be a mouthpiece. And on the other hand, if you're independent, how can you be so closely tied to the mission that you're actually a part of that mission? So that's kind of the summary of the soul searching that's going on within Catholic media right now, and particularly within the diocesan press. Are we independent Catholic journalists, or are we evangelists helping our bishop succeed in spreading the faith through diocesan media? And that affects how you're going to be approaching these editors with your content and what you're looking for. And it manifests itself in very many different ways. Sometimes the diocesan publication is a completely separate business. Other times it's totally integrated ministry, and it's viewed as a ministry. It's sometimes the editor is the communications director. Other times the editor is employed by a separate corporation. The bishop might be the publisher, but other than that, it operates independently, and that editor has sole control, really, over the editorial judgment and what goes in the newspaper. On the other hand, if it's integrated, there might be a big planning process, and the bishop and the leadership of the diocese is heavily involved with making sure that the publication reflects what the diocese wants to promote. And all of this can kind of be summed up with, is the purpose of the publication primarily, from an editorial perspective, is it primarily news, or is it primarily to evangelize? And that also will affect your content needs and getting the sisters' stories out there, knowing what their primary approach is. So that's kind of a recap of and a brief summary of some of the internal debate going on within the Catholic press, particularly the diocesan press. So with that in mind, how do we get to the next section of our presentation and get into building relationships given that reality? So there's some ideas I have for you here. First, I think it's important to really talk with your leadership council, look at your strategic plan, look at your overall goals, and really prioritize what your needs are and what it is that would be most beneficial to get out about the congregation in diocesan media. And this includes national Catholic media too. Just as an aside, I've been talking a lot about diocesan media because all of you have a presence in a diocese, more than one probably. But there's also Catholic News Service, Catholic News Agency, national Catholic magazines, national Catholic blogs that very well may be looking for your content, would accept a well-written story, a nice photo package, and that's a great way, especially Catholic News Service or Catholic News Agency, to get into a lot of diocesan publications by having Catholic News Service take your content and take your stories. So that's one idea right out the gate. But when we're talking about within a diocese and beginning to say, all right, we have a school or a hospital, or we have a ministry of the sisters in this diocese. Maybe one of our sisters works for a Catholic Charity Agency and she's doing some great work within this diocese. How do we get that information out? So the first thing is really to identify what your needs are. What is it that you're trying to do? Are you trying to advocate among the Catholic population for issues that the sisters care about? Maybe that's poverty, education, the environment. Or are you trying to promote an event? Or are you trying to just increase awareness for vocations and donations and some form of connection and support for the congregation? What is your goal? And then the second would be, which of those entities, the newspaper, what form of diocesan media do you feel would be most beneficial for you to reach that group? The next thing I would recommend that you do is to research who the editor is and who the communications director is and find out what their relationship is to one another. Sometimes the editor reports to the communications director and it's integrated. Sometimes they don't get along at all. They feel that they are adversarial within a diocese. We had one diocese that we worked with where the sister did the website and she was completely separate from the communications director who was responsible for social media and media relations. That was completely separate from a corporation that ran the diocesan newspaper. That was completely separate from TV and radio, which was operated by a priest out at a parish. And so you had in one diocese, if the archbishop showed up somewhere, you had 3-4 people showing up to cover one event. So how are you going to fit into that when you've got so many competing organizations within one organization of a diocese? So knowing that landscape is going to be very helpful for you. And when you're beginning to want to get something into the diocesan newspaper in that diocese, you wouldn't go to the newspaper, you wouldn't go to the communications director. That's not going to get you anywhere. You have to have a relationship with the editor. So knowing that landscape doesn't take very much effort. You go onto the diocesan website and usually it's pretty clear who's reporting to who and where the publication falls. Third, understanding the mission of the publication, I think you can also do a little online research by just reviewing the publication. If it's a weekly diocesan newspaper, it's going to have a news approach. They may also have great evangelization content, but their primary purpose is news and information from a Catholic perspective, and you can tell that by the content that they're producing. You can see what their production schedule is often. You can find out how they're integrated with other forms of diocesan media. If you see a newspaper article showing up in the print version that also shows up on the website, that also shows up on social media, that's an indication that they have an integrated communication strategy. If you look at the newspaper and it's completely different than what the website has and is completely different than the diocesan social media, then you know there's different people doing different things and it's not integrated. So that's helpful for you to know. Once you do that, I really encourage you to pick up the phone, create an email, and reach out to those stakeholders. If you want to get your content about the sisters into the newspaper, reach out to that editor. Say, I want to introduce myself to you or reintroduce myself to you. I want to learn what your needs are editorially. I'd like to share with you what some exciting things there are with the sisters, and especially share with you some things that we hope would be of mutual benefit and interest to us. So let's say your congregation has a priority to support the environment, and you want to make sure that there's some coverage about what the sisters are doing for Earth Day. Having that relationship with the editor will let you know whether your press release is enough, and whether they're going to send somebody to cover and interview one of the sisters, or whether they would welcome an essay or a theological reflection on the environment, or whether they would welcome you doing a complete piece, a feature, submitting the photos, and then they would run it. Having that conversation with the editor early, you'll know, no, one editor might say, I'm willing to listen to you pitch a story to me, but no, we don't accept submitted content. The other is like, I'm a one-person show. I have to do everything. I think what the sisters do is wonderful. I would love it if you just sent me everything. You won't know that until you've done some research and looking at who the stakeholders are and reaching out to them to see how you might work together. And then you can develop your plan and execute your plan. So here's some examples of how getting a story published might work. And this is kind of a recap of these examples that I just went through. So you've got diocesan newspaper in Diocese A. They're independent Catholic journalists. It's an independent corporation. They've got a very short planning timeline. They're probably every other week or weekly. So, you know, they may not have a lot of time for you, and they may not want to meet with you, and they may not want to do a bunch of advanced planning. And so the need met might be more of a traditional press release. What's the news angle? And then if I think that after you've followed up with me that I see that this will be of interest to my readers, then I might send a reporter to follow up on your press release. Contrast that with a diocesan magazine in Diocese B. The editor is also the communications director. They have a much longer planning timeline. They have way fewer issues. Maybe it's a bi-monthly, maybe it's a quarterly, maybe it is a monthly. And they're going to want to know, how does this fit into the mission? How is this going to be advancing what my bishop wants me to be doing? I'm trying to use all of the diocesan media with my magazine to advance the church. And so with what you're sending me and what you want to do with what the sisters are doing, how does that fit into that? And so they also, you know, might accept a pre-written piece if there's an event, and it might show up because they won't have the staffing to send a reporter. So if you send them something, they might run that. So that kind of gives you an example of how this might work in two dioceses. So the do's and don'ts, sort of summing up where we are at right now. Doing the research about learning about the stakeholders, building that relationship with the editor and the communication director, and learn what their needs are and preferred way of working. you know, one of the things that we've learned in the 40 dioceses that we serve, and we've got another 20 religious orders and other Catholic organizations that we help publish, and is that these people, just like you are pulled in a lot of different directions. And so if the communications director is also the editor, or the editor, they're getting pressure from the diocese, all of the offices who are their colleagues, the Catholic schools, vocations, Catholic charities, family life office, religious education. Everybody wants the editor to cover their ministry within a diocese. And so as a congregation, how are you going to compete when the people within the chancery feel like they're not even getting everything that they're looking for? So one of the ways to build relationships is to get to know the editor, look at what is going on in that diocese, and see if you can have a twofer or multiple wins. If that sister from your congregation is working in the diocesan school system, then the approach is to say, hey, if you have something promoting your diocesan Catholic schools, we would love to help you with that, because we have one of our sisters who's doing this wonderful work. Or one of our sisters is really helping the poor in one of your Catholic charity agencies. And we would love to help you promote your own Catholic charity agencies, and by featuring our sister. One of the things that also comes about is, you know, is the relationship of the congregation within the diocese. And you, as the communicator for the sisters, can really help be a bridge builder. Because when you go to that communications director or that editor and you say, help me learn about what the priorities are of the bishop, and I want to also share with you what the priorities are of the sister, of our sisters, and see where those overlap, because maybe we can share content with one another. So the third thing is that really meeting their needs might be helping them provide actual content, helping give them ideas of how they can partner with you, so that they can be seen as advancing their bishop's goals. And they also will see that you're a willing member of that local diocesan church, that you're willing to share their content when it's relevant to priorities of the sisters. And you're willing to share their content, and they would be maybe more willing to share yours, and work together in that way. And those things don't occur if you're just sending press releases. It really takes building a relationship, listening, understanding what that editor's needs are, what that diocese's needs are, and to see where there's an area of overlap. Otherwise, you're just another organization sending the editor a press release, and those may not get you very far. Under the don'ts, don't assume that all of the Catholic media has a news approach. One of the things that you know, you can do by building that relationship is just really getting to understand the editor's perspective. Why is it that you do what you do? What do you like about your work? What is it that is and you'll hear what that person's mission is. I want to advance the idea that Jesus Christ is the source of happiness in this life or the next, or I consider myself a journalist, and it isn't that they aren't mutually exclusive, but you'll kind of get a sense of where that editor's head is at, to know how to approach it. But not everybody has a news approach. Sometimes it's heavy on the ministry side. Don't assume that their lack of interest means that they aren't interested in what the congregation is doing. So many of us have had our lives touched by the sisters. And I think going to the editor and communication director and reminding them of the role that the sisters have played in building up the church, and that they still are so vital and active and alive today in that mission, and how can we get that message out, and see if you can fit into their planning and their thinking that way, and without expecting those immediate results. So that's what I had for you today. I hope this was interesting and helpful. I think we've got still a good bit of time for some discussions and some questions, which I welcome. So I guess I'll invite either Jennifer or Brian to take back the screen.
Brian, I think you need to unmute.
Apologies. We do have our hand raised for our first question, so I will open up the audio for Sister Joanne Gallagher. And there you go, Sister Joanne. If you unmute yourself, you should be able to go.
Can you see me?
I can hear you, sister.
But I can't see me. This is a very different format for Zoom. But anyway, I'll just say, you know, I appreciate everything you've said about the local media. I'm in Boston, and anybody who knows the Boston media, and I think you do because my leadership liaison knows you personally. At any rate, I'm also interested in the national media, like you mentioned, sending a story to CNS. I'm interested in NCR, Global Sisters Report. I mean, I know they're always soliciting Global Sisters Report, but it's like, I'm looking for the formula, if you will, or I'm looking for when, you know, where to think ahead in order to access that. What I do know is if I put ads in these places to the tune of $600 to $800, you know, maybe they'll give me some print time too.
Right.
But, you know, I want to know more about accessing the national media because all I need to do is go to the person in my leadership team when it comes to our local media and say, make it work. And she does.
Yeah.
But that may not be everybody's situation.
Right, right.
I'm sure it's not.
Well, and I think that Catholic News Service is, you know, it's up to their discretion of how they accept things, and it's all of those standards that they have. And, you know, it's, if you can get them to accept a complete story, the benefit of that is that you have the complete control of your message that way. You can submit a photo and submit a finished news piece. And then you have a chance of diocesan media picking that up. When it comes to the other national titles, it's no different than the local diocesan media. You have a single editor making a single judgment about how to get in, how to accept content and versus a news service. And so I think the same rules apply. I think finding out, you know, NCR, National Catholic Reporter, is completely independent, and they have a particular viewpoint. And so, you know, reaching out to them, they're independent Catholic journalists. The local bishop has not even wanted them to use the word Catholic because they've been so controversial on this. And then you have all the way to the opposite extreme, National Catholic Register, which is owned by EWTN, and they have Catholic News Agency as a part of that, and that's a behemoth. But building a relationship with them, you might be able to get on EWTN News Nightly, you might be able to get a Catholic News Agency story, and you might get into the Register. And so that takes building relationships and really figuring out the organization. So.
Okay. And well, we had a hand raised, but seems to have been dropped now, but we do have another question via text. Along the lines of, if Patrick, you could speak to your experience when it comes to diocesan publications' preference for featuring sisters who still wear a traditional habit. In the case of our member here, Belinda, some of her sisters, the Daughters of Charity, wear a habit, some even veils. But for many LCWR congregation sisters wear lay clothing. And Belinda notes that at least in her area in St. Louis, it's a constant struggle in that area.
Yes, I think that is a challenge. There is, I have heard it said in chanceries when I've been meeting, there is a bias toward, we want sisters to look like sisters. And I can feel all of you watching this cringe because of all the great work that your sisters are doing. And really, it's going to boil down to how we're dressing. And so I think, again, it's going to be a trying to align priorities. I know in St. Louis, they have a huge priority with Catholic education. How many sisters are involved in Catholic education? And so it would be having that conversation, I think, with them about the work that's being done and try to build up the case based on the work that's being done. And making sure that we're highlighting it, and also giving them the facts about the numbers of sisters and the role that they're playing, so that they just don't dismiss sisters who don't wear habits in favor of a good image, quote unquote, a good photo. So I think that is another example of building those relationships, I think, with these editors and helping them see.
Okay, we had a follow-up from another of our members following up Sister Joanne's original question. Siobhan here in the Chicago area was mentioning that, like Sister Joanne, she finds that obviously it's pretty straightforward to build an advertising relationship when there's dollars involved that you're providing for an outlet, but editors are less responsive in her experience. So the bottom line is everyone has only so much budgeted when it comes to that advertising side of things. What is an additional formula? Is there a way to work around, or is there a back door or a side door when it comes to building that relationship on the editorial side?
I think in those bigger places, the strategy might be to go with the other outlets. You've got Relevant Radio in Chicago. Archdiocesan Communications operates social media. They're always looking for great stories. They're always looking to have new and fresh content on their social media feeds. And so there might be a way for you to kind of set the newspaper aside if you've got a roadblock there, and see if you can get further with other avenues, with other forms of diocesan media. And then that may make a stronger case to come back to the paper. Relevant Radio in Chicago covered sisters doing this last year for Earth Day. We'd really love to get something in the paper this year. What would it take to do that? Same thing with social media. If you can get the communications director to repost something or work with them to get you on a podcast or to cover something, then you can come back around to the newspaper editor and say, we've been really getting some cooperation in these other archdiocesan media outlets. What can we do here?
And again, if you want to submit a question, you can just write it right in the chat area. As well, you can use the raise hand function. I believe, Jennifer, you also had a question or two that you wanted to pose.
Well, of course, I always have questions. Patrick, what's an example of one of the best pitches you've ever seen to the Catholic press that you managed?
We have two sisters in the Diocese of Lansing that nothing to me is more moving than just the beauty and the success of the work of the ministry that the sisters are doing. And one of the things that they are very good about doing for us, there's these two sisters that run it's called the St. Luke's New Life Center, and it's in Flint, Michigan. And we do so much on them and what they're doing, because what they are able to do is show us real inspirational people who have benefited from their ministry. It will bring tears to your eyes, the women's lives who have been changed because of what the sisters are doing in Flint. They make the case for what they're doing by showing it in the lives of someone they're benefiting. We very rarely are featuring the sisters. We're featuring the people who the sisters are benefiting. And when that shows up, and when that, and we get, we always sort of drop everything when they contact and say, we've got a really great success story here. And it always gets our attention. It always gets our attention versus sending over the introduction of a new program and a press release.
Thank you. Brian, I think that Dusty has something to share, so I'll shush.
Okay. And just for the sake of, Dusty was commenting about working with NCR and GSR, and I'll share it with everybody here momentarily, but there is the new GSR Global Sisters Report, their new community news option, where it is, you know, somewhere where you can straightforwardly post information about upcoming events and that sort of thing. And I don't know, Dusty, you can shoot a text or raise your hand if you'd like to add to your comment here, but Dusty does note that in speaking with NCR recently, they were encouraging about submitting stories, pitching stories at any point, though as yet she hasn't seen any picked up as a national story, but it seems they are at least open to pitches from folks. So that is a note. And I believe Sister Joanne had a follow-up question, so I'll unmute you, Sister Joanne, and you should.
Yeah, I don't want to dominate, and you know, as Jennifer, I have tons of questions. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, I never. But I love all the stuff you're saying, and my latest Bible is the article that you gave us in the publication about the 6 signs of success, and I was going to write to Michelle to get more copies, and then I couldn't wait because you people were, you know, in transition, so I ended up probably illegally making people for the whole thing myself and giving it to some of our leadership team, and they're all into it. And but I'm thinking, you know, this whole thing of having being at the table as a you know, as not just as a like as one who is a strategist, not just a technician.
That's right.
And that's great. And I mean, I think, you know, we're working on that in our own congregation. Most of our leadership is really in tune with that. I say most. But the other piece is, how do you be at the table in these archdiocesan forums? I mean, I'm very lucky to have somebody who's, you know, really has run iCatholic Media in Boston. But I mean, how do the rest of us get to the table? And then the other piece of it is when you talked about the beauty and success of the work, and I just think that's so true, whether a sister is wearing a habit or not. I had lunch with somebody today, and she ran into some guy. She was lobbying in the State House, and she ran into somebody, and he looked at her. He says, "I know you. You're that God lady that walks around the neighborhood talking to everybody." You know, so it didn't matter what she was wearing. And, you know, so, and then the featuring people the sisters benefit, that's the direction that we're very much moving into in terms of broadening our mission. So, so I'm grateful for that, but I just want to know, and then it was the social media strategy. We certainly try to work with that. And you hadn't said anything about that until you, like this morning I posted, and I've on Instagram, the National Migration Week. I've been posting it every day. And I keep, lately I've been tagging James Martin. And James Martin suddenly today, I was over the moon this morning when this happened, he reposted my Instagram post onto his, and he has like 52.7 thousand followers. And so I started calling our justice person and other people, but I want to be able to
Yeah, you won the lottery with that one. Good going.
I want to do more of that strategically, not just I got lucky.
Yeah. Well, and I think just like you're having the same conversations of trying to get in, if you run into a roadblock with the newspaper editor, whoever's doing the diocesan social media, that beast has to get fed. Everybody is feeling the pressure to create their own content, repost relevant content from others, and to generate this social dynamism that the media is supposed to be positively doing. And so you want to be part of that conversation. You want to have your content be in that mix. And so you want some love, you have to give some love. You have to have a relationship with who they are. What would be helpful for me to send you? Would you like some images? Would you like some stories that we've come up with? Video is the top thing that is that gets engagement on social media. And so, short little 1 minute, 2 minute clips, could you do something customized for a diocese that they would repost? I mean, just what you did with Father Martin by tagging him. I can't believe that if you did the same in a diocese where here we have our sister at work walking the streets in the diocese of X, and you tag them, that they wouldn't be forwarding that. And then once that trust builds and that relationship builds, then hopefully you can expand your footprint to the rest of diocesan media, especially if you've got a roadblock with somebody, the editor or someone like that.
I'll throw it out there, a final call for any questions for Patrick, anything that may have come up over the course of the last hour or so. I'll also note again, just a reminder that for folks who may not have been able to join us, if you know any of them today, of course, this webinar, like all of our CWR Academy webinars, is going to be archived after the fact. So if there's anything you may have missed during the course of this, if you had to jump out and tend to something in the office, you can of course always come back on the CWR member site and access it there, beginning probably toward the end of the day tomorrow is when it'll be back up. But again, if we have any final questions, it doesn't look like there are any rolling in. I don't know if Jennifer, if you had any more, but I will hand the baton off to you if that works.
All right. Well, I don't know if this has a brief answer, and we don't have very much time left, but I was interested in your perspective on, Pope Francis kind of addressed this whole issue of independence and the role of the Catholic press last September when he talked to the Dicastery of Communication and the Italian Catholic press. Have you seen it have any impact in your area?
Well, I don't know if it's a direct impact or not, but I know the Catholic Press Association is going through a position of a kind of an exciting period where they're looking at what their role is. The Catholic Academy of Communicators folded, and the Catholic Media Conference had always been for many years been the joint conference. And so it's kind of a time right now, exciting time right now for Catholic communicators through the Catholic Press Association to get involved and to say what their needs are from an association. Because going to the Catholic Media Conference is how you really get to know and dialogue with and network, that's the word I'm looking for, with so many Catholic communicators. You've got the National Catholic Press there, you've got the Diocesan Press there, and I know CWR had a booth there. But if you're publishing for your congregation, the Catholic Press is a great way for you to network and get to know some people. And so that's, and also, you know, make sure that the, that your needs are being met. So, I mean, you have CWR, which is specifically dedicated for you, but there's also, I think, benefits of the larger communications community. I know our group gets together for our clients. We have a client meeting, but then many of them are also very heavily involved in the Catholic press. So just some thoughts there.
I'm out of questions. I have shared the link to the article of the issues that Pope Francis brought up with the media. To, you know, I think it reflects what you were talking about, that conflict between, you know, speak the truth at all costs and also spread the gospel.
Right. Can do both. We can do both.
All right, well, it seems that since we don't have any more lingering questions, this would be a good time to, first of all, thank Patrick very much. Remind everyone out there that there is a survey, and you're, as chair of the Education Committee, I humbly beg you to fill it out. Remind you that, that if you wish to continue to dialogue with Patrick, you can reach out to him, contact him directly. And I want to thank all the members of the Education Committee who are tirelessly working to come up with webinar topics that we steal those ideas from you. I want to thank the CWR staff for being awesome as always, and to all of you for attending. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye now.